Today is August 4th, 2024. We are interviewing Shelley Weiner in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the United States. My name is Sherry Aviv. Today is August 4th, 2024. We are interviewing Shelley Weiner in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the United States. And my name is Sherry Aviv. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good, good. Why don't we start off, why don't you share your current name and spell it for us?
My name is Shelley Weiner, Shelley Weiner.
And what was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Rachel, Rachel. I was named after my grandmother, my mother's mother.
And
my last name, Weiner.
And so, did you have a special nickname as a child?
Yes. My grandfather had 7 sons, and I was the first girl born. And he called me Kukla, or Cookie, which kind of stuck. In Russian, Kukla means doll. And my mother called me Cookie for everybody that knew me as Cookie from back before the war and even after the war, yeah.
Yeah, very, very sweet.
Yeah.
And what is your birth date?
My birthday is August 25th, 1937.
And how old are you today?
Today I'm 86. In a couple of weeks I'll be 87.
Very nice. And what was your first language?
My first language was Yiddish and Russian. Because in 1939, when I was 2 years old, the Russians came into our area. The reason they came is because Stalin and Hitler had made a pact at that time. And so they came in and stayed for 2 years until 1941, when the Germans, Nazis, came in.
Mm-hmm. And what city or town were you born in?
I was born in a town called Rovno.
Can you spell that for us?
Rovno. It now is spelled, because it's in the Ukraine now, it's spelled Rivne, Rivna. And it has other spellings, but you know, we won't go into that.
And so, what do you know about how big the town was, how many Jewish people were there?
Well, what I've been told by my mother was that it was a town of about 100,000, and about 25,000 were Jewish people. And they were, you know, they didn't live like in a ghetto or anything. They were integrated into the town. And there were doctors and lawyers and professors. You know, there were all kinds of Jews that were part of the town, yeah. And businessmen, of course, yeah.
And so they didn't live in a separate Jewish area?
No, they did not live in a separate Jewish area.
And do you know about the Jewish life there? Was there synagogues or anything?
I know that it was, you know, only what my mother would tell me, and my father went to yeshiva, and he was very well educated in, you know, reading Torah and all, you know, all the Jewish things that you learn in a yeshiva, how, you know, how to conduct services and all that. My mother was a really free spirit, and she, as a teenager, worked for an organization that sent people to Israel at the time. And that was her passion. And this is before she got married. And I know they observed all the Jewish holidays. They kept kosher. But as a child, I don't ever remember going, and they followed all the Jewish laws, but I don't remember ever going to a synagogue or a temple. I'm sure they did, but I don't remember because I was so little then.
So when your mother had this passion for Israel, did she actually ever go at that time to Palestine, Israel?
She didn't get to go because she got married young, and then the war broke out.
And do you have any memories of, especially with your grandfather, of Shabbat dinners
Oh
or
yes,
holidays?
I do. My grandfather adored me, and I was spoiled rotten. I really was. I could do anything, and I wouldn't get really punished for it. Do you want me to tell you some of the things I did? He lived next door to my parents, so he would have me for dinner a lot, and he would tell me to get up on the table and dance, and I would dance and kick the dishes and just have a great time. And my grandmother would yell, "Oh, she's breaking all the..." So I'll buy you a new set. Don't worry about the dishes. I did a terrible thing. I went, the neighbors had chickens, and I went and I collected all the eggs, and I went up and down the stairs and broke all the eggs and drank them. I liked raw eggs, and nobody punished me. I played in the mud. The only one that would say a thing would be my mother. Everybody spoiled me. My uncles, I was a brat. My mother's sister would walk me to like preschool, kindergarten, and because she was from the country and not very sophisticated, I had to walk on the other side of the street. So those are memories that I have, yeah.
So do you remember what kind of home you lived in? Was it an apartment? Was it a house?
No, it was a house. It was a house. I had my own bedroom. I even remember the furniture in the bedroom because I had like a brass bed, and I could see in the morning when I was, woke up, I could see the sun shining off the bed, and we had a very nice middle class, I guess you would say, life. My grandfather had a big business, and my father worked with him, and my mother actually opened up a grocery store in the bottom, in the basement of our house, and she loved doing that. She loved being in business. And I had, a maid take care of me. So it was a very nice life. Yeah, we went on vacation. I remember that. Yeah.
Where did you go?
We went to the country, and yeah.
Do you remember any favorite dish or smells or any favorite pastry or anything from that time?
No, I don't. When I would get a cold or something, my mother would make something called an uggle muggle. An uggle muggle is cocoa, butter. It's delicious. And that's supposed to take care of pain in your throat. And the milk, I guess, and you whip it all up, and that's what I remember is the uggle muggle. I love those.
So, since you've talked a little bit about your parents, before I do that, did you have any friends or cousins or kids that you played with?
I had a lot of cousins, but they lived in other, I had my cousin Raya, but the other cousins I really don't remember because they lived in other villages or towns, and I just don't remember them.
So let's talk a little bit about your parents, if we can. Let's start with your father. What was his birth name?
His birthday was September 3rd, 2012. I mean, 1912.
1912. And what was his name at birth? Or
At
what
birth,
did he go
it
by?
was Meyer Israel Wiener.
Uh-huh. And did he go by that his whole life?
No, he went by Meyer.
Okay.
Right.
And how many siblings did he have? Do you know?
He had 6 brothers and a sister.
And your father survived the war?
My father was taken into the Russian army in 1939. Well, he was actually sent to Siberia, and then when the war got heated up, they put him in the army.
And how many of his siblings survived?
My father's siblings, none.
Okay. So your father, you mentioned your grandfather. Was that your father's father?
Yes,
And he lived next door to you, and
right.
okay.
And my father was the first one to get married. The others were much younger. Yeah, the boys.
Okay. And what kind of business did they have? You said they had a business.
Well, they had a grain mill and also construction.
And they worked together in terms of that. And do you know how your father and mother met and got married?
I don't know. I really don't know.
And where was your father born?
He was born in Rovna.
So how many generations, first on your father's side and then your mother, had they been there for?
Years, like maybe 1600s.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They were, well, my grandfather and his were very well integrated into the town, you know, in general.
Do you know if they had a Jewish cemetery that?
Oh yeah, there was a Jewish cemetery. There's a Jewish cemeteries there that when the Soviets came in, they knocked down the stones and they put a walkway there. And when I went back to the Ukraine in 2013, there was a young man that took me, and they had been finding grave markers and cleaning them up. And this is where my mother's parents are buried, because they died before the war.
Did they ever find anything on your family for the markers?
No, I also went to the city hall to find if I could, because I don't have a birth certificate, or my mother, you know, none of us have any papers from before the war. And first of all, it's very difficult because it's all in big books. And I did find my grandfather's tax records. Was the only thing, yeah.
So your father was in business with his father, your grandfather, and at what point you said, so what about your grandmother on your father's side? Was she a homemaker? Did she help out?
My father's side, well, she was a homemaker, but she was ill the whole time. I remember her, and they wouldn't, you know, apparently she had cancer. And so she spent a lot of time, you know, in bed.
So you said you were named after your grandmother. Is that on your mother's side?
Yes.
Okay.
My mother's mother died pretty young. She was like in her early 40s or mid-40s.
So was your father's side Orthodox or?
Very Orthodox. My mother's side. My mother's side lived in a village, and my grandfather was very Orthodox. Very Orthodox.
So why don't you tell me your mother's name at birth?
My mother's name was Hava Sosna, S-O-S-N-A.
And can you spell her first name too?
Hava?
Best you can.
Anything, H-A.
Or C-H.
V-A-H.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they called her Eva here.
And what village, you said they lived in a village? Where did they?
Miatin. M-I-A-T-I-N, Miatin.
And how many siblings did she have?
She had, she was one of 4 sisters, and she had 4 brothers, but one of them died young, like at 17 or something like that.
And so for her parents, they lived in Miatin.
Miatin.
And her mother died at a very young age, you said.
And so did her father.
So did they die before the war?
Yes, they died before the war. And they were buried in Ravna. And my mother, because her mother died, and my mother was next to the youngest, so her grandfather, being religious and very, very poor, had a sister that lived in Ravna that had no children. So he sent my mother to live with her. And that's where she spent her teenage years.
How old was your mother when your grandmother died?
She was probably about 14, 15, yeah.
Well, it's lovely that you're named after her mother.
Yeah, and so was my cousin.
Right. Your
Right.
cousin Raya is also Rachel.
Rachel, right.
Right. That's very nice. So do you know if your mother or father were involved in any youth activities
Yes.
or things in, getting ready when they started hearing about the war? Do you know if they were involved in any resistance or anything?
Yeah, they were involved, as I told you, in Zionist activities. That's all I know. My mother talked about them very fondly.
Right. In terms of home life, how did your mother built this grocery store underneath? Was it food from the farm? I mean, what did she sell in this grocery store?
It was all, all the kind of normal things you would have in a grocery store. Butter, eggs, milk. I don't know, if she had, any boxed, food. But yeah, it was a regular grocery store.
So you mentioned earlier you have this life, your father and mother, they're in business, your grandfather, because your other grandparents are gone. And you mentioned going to preschool and school. Do you remember that? What that was like?
I just remember those incidents. One time I told you my mother's sister walked me to school, and she came home and really told my mother what a brat I was. And then one of my uncles, my father's brother, took me on his horse to school. But I don't remember where the school, was and whatever. But I like going.
Do you remember at what point that you couldn't go anymore? Was it anything related to?
As soon as the Nazis came into Ravna.
Okay. So, do you remember first? Did the Russians come first, or the Nazis?
Yeah, the Russians came in '39. The Nazis came in '41.
So, how did life change that you know or saw firsthand when the Soviets first came?
Right. When the Soviets came, well, I was really little when they came, so I guess I just know that I don't remember much about my father at all because he was taken, and my mother's brothers were taken too, to Russia, to the Soviet Union. So I don't remember those. Right. I was like 2 years old.
So the women had to raise the children.
Yeah. Well, my grandfather was there, and my uncles were really too young to be taken into the army.
So then...
Oh, I don't know why they weren't taken. That's a good question.
Yeah. So then, do you remember when the Nazis came in?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any special moments you
Yes,
want to
there's
share?
a special time. I remember that it was summer. It was... And
year 1941?
1941. And my mother was packing a suitcase to go to the country for our vacation. And I was very excited and running around the house, you know. And then I knew, all of a sudden, everything got quiet. Nobody talked. They were talked in hushed tones. And we never went on any vacation. And the other things that I remember from that thing is my mother didn't really, well, first of all, she was a tough woman and very brave. She didn't look what the typical Jewish woman looked like, you know. And everybody had to wear a Jewish star made out of cloth on their clothes. And my mother would take and put on a raincoat over her Jewish star. And because there was such a large family, Jews were not allowed to go to the market to shop. You know, as soon as the Nazis came in, they started passing all these laws. But my mother would go to the market to shop for the family. And I remember standing by the window, waiting for her to come home. And I somehow knew at that time that you know, if this was dangerous for her, that if somebody had informed on her, she wouldn't come home. And, you know, the next thing when I really became aware that these people were dangerous, one of the other laws they passed is that all Jewish men were supposed to report for relocation duty. My grandfather kind of knew, I don't know how, that this was not the case, that they were starting to do concentration camps. And so he built a hiding place, because he, you know, was a builder, he was able to do for the men to be during the day, you know, his sons and my mother's in-laws and all. And the women would come and they would cook the midday meal, and the men would come in and eat and then go back to the hiding place. Well, Raya's job and mine were to sit outside the house and look down the street to see if there were any jeeps with what we called the brown shirts. This was a group of Nazis that were going from house to house to get the men that hadn't reported for, you know, their relocation duty. And so one day we saw these men at our neighbor's house in this Jeep, 4 of them. And we went in the house and told the adults, and all of the men ran in the hiding place. The women cleaned up very fast. But Raya's father, I don't know, for some reason, he was just a slow-moving person. He never got into the hiding place. And the next thing we knew was these men, you know,
The brown shirts.
came into the house. Mm-hmm. They grabbed my uncle and they started beating him. And we started screaming, 2 little girls, you know, crying. They put us in a shiffer robe. They put us in the other room. And it was terrible, you know. And then it was very frightening for us. It was blood all over. And that is when we kind of realized that these were men, people we were going to be afraid of. They took him away, and I don't know what, but in a few weeks they returned him. But he got killed in the massacre anyway.
Yeah. So how many people, your uncles, grandfather, brother, how many people were hiding in this barn?
I don't know the amount, you know. But if I were to guess, I would say at least a dozen or more.
Mm-hmm. And did they, how did they finally get discovered that they had to leave the hiding place?
Well, you know, the next thing that they did is they created a ghetto in Ravna. And they separated the men and women, and then I never saw any of my male relatives again. And my mother and I were in this ghetto. Raya and her mother, they would come back and forth. They lived in the village of Myatin, but they would come back and forth. And I don't remember them being in the ghetto with us. I was in a room with like 20 strangers. I wasn't supposed to go out. My mother would go to work in a factory every day. And then...
Did they only take women to the ghetto? Was your grandfather
No, the men
with
were
you?
in a separate ghetto.
I see.
Okay. And I mean, there were a lot of Jewish people in Ravna. So it was, you know, a big job for the Nazis. Anyway.
Who took care of you during the day when you're...
Nobody. I was just there. I followed the rules. Anyway, one day my mother went to work, and one of her Polish neighbors told her there was going to be this action, this massacre. And this would be a good time for me to read the eyewitness account, if you think.
So let's finish this part of the story first.
So she snuck us out of the ghetto. She never would tell me how or where, whatever. And we walked to the village, which was...
To where your aunt was?
Yeah, to where my aunt was, and to where the farmer lived next door to her, right?
So how far a walk was it from the ghetto to Myatin? I mean, how were you able to do that and not be discovered?
Well, we went through the woods. There were a lot of woods, and my mother knew the area, and it was nighttime, and, you know, right.
Did they do a count in the ghetto to look for people? Did anyone come after you?
No, not that I remember, no. We were there a very short time before. I want to say we probably weren't there more than a month.
What about clothing? Did you have like one outfit or bathing?
You know what? I'm always curious about that because I know I was growing. I have no idea how, you know I didn't go around naked or without clothes, but I never thought to ask my mother about that, you know? But I know I had clothes on my body and well, I don't know if I had shoes. I really don't remember those details. I remember details that were traumatic, you know? But I don't remember the everyday details of life. It's very different, you know. When a trauma happens, it just goes in your brain and you never forget it. And you never forget the feelings you had. But, you know, and certain things I remember was being very cold and being very hot. But I don't even remember being hungry. And I know we went for weeks without eating.
So when you're leaving the ghetto and heading to Myatin, do you remember, first of all, what year and what time of year it was?
Yes, this was like, well, the first, second, or third, beginning of November, and 1941.
Okay. So you're headed to Myatin. What do you think your mother was looking for when she got there? What was she hoping for?
She was hoping for the farmer to hide us.
Did she know the farmer?
Oh, she knew the farmer well. My grandfather knew him well. And my grandfather had been negotiating with him, trying to offer him money, jewelry, whatever, you know. And as you well know, it was very dangerous for non-Jews to help, you know, Jews, because the punishment would be death to them and their entire family, and all their property would be confiscated. Now, this farmer and his wife, they had an 18-year-old teenager and a 16 or 15-year-old teenage girl living at home. And it wasn't only that the Nazis would find you, but your neighbors were always looking to see what was going on, you know, even in a small village, and they would tell. And I found out when I went back to Ukraine in 2013 that if you turned a Jew in, you got 2 kilos of sugar per each person.
So can you tell us the name of the farmer and his wife and spell their names if you can?
Castellanos, Kostolnik. It's the best I could do.
What were their first names? Do you remember his or her first name?
We just referred to them as Kostolnik.
And
Raya would remember,
Yeah.
but I don't.
and at this time you were what, 4 or 5 years
I
old?
was 4.
And you mentioned their children. Was there also concern either for the children saying something or, you know, as well, you know, did the children know you were hiding there, I guess?
Yeah,
is the
well, let
question.
me tell you how it came about that this farmer agreed to hide us, okay? So we got to the farm. My aunt was very good friends with the farmer's wife and the young 18-year-old. They had you know, she would bake cookies for him. My aunt was a wonderful cook. And, you know, you know, they had a nice relationship. So, you know, the Nazis could not have accomplished what they did, fighting a war and eliminating all the Jews in Europe. And so they would, you know, come to the villages and throw out pamphlets and asking the local population to come to town to help them to do work. But they wouldn't tell them what the work was, but they would pay them for the work. Well, the farmer's son was 18, and he and a group of friends saw the pamphlet, and they decided to go into town and to see what the work was. Well, they got there the day of the massacre
In Rovna?
in Rovna, and they were asked to collect the bodies that didn't fall into the ravine and throw in the ravine. These men, young men, were so horrified by what they saw that they went home through the woods, and on the way back they decided to form a partisan group to, you know, blow up trains and bridges and things like that and live in the woods. And he got home just at the time as my mother and aunt were begging the farmer to hide us. And he was the one that, after what he saw, convinced his parents to hide us. And not only that, like I said to you earlier, it was difficult for non-Jews because the neighbors would tell. And so he said, I'll be coming home every month to make sure they're still here. And that's why the farmer just, you know, he made a hiding place. And I remember standing there watching him putting the hay on top of the barn and creating a space in the back where we could be.
So let me just go back in time just a little bit. So you and your mother are making your way to Miatin, to the farmer's house. How did your aunt know to do that too. Did they communicate? Were there letters back and forth? How did the two siblings?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, they lived probably, they saw each other, basically. I think you know Raya's story about her mother knew the woods very well, and she wanted her husband and Raya to leave the town, because everybody kind of had a feeling something bad was going to happen. And they got to the edge of town, and Raya's father was afraid to leave. And he gave Raya her gave Sonia, the wife, the passport, went back to town, and he was killed in the massacre. And my aunt and Raya went to the village.
So just to give everybody all the different names, your mother Chava, her sister was
Sonia,
and her child was Rachel, called Raya, right? And so the four of you were there, and the men or anyone else that remained, you talked about the massacre. Can you tell what you know about that, what happened there, or that they were...
Do you want me to read it?
I'm going to read a little bit later, but what do you know about that?
What I know is that they told all the Jews in town that there was going to be a relocation, and they were to come to this place outside of town, and they were to bring their valuables and food and whatever they could bring with them. And, you know, they were gathered up by the SS, the Ukrainian police, everybody, and they were marched to this place called Sosenka eventually. And when they got there, they realized they were going to their death, because there were 3 very large trenches, and there was a group of soldiers, and they made everybody get undressed, men and women separately, and they shot them, and they fell into the trenches.
So,
and in 3 days, they killed 17,500 Jews in Ravna.
So besides your uncles being taken into the Soviet army,
right,
and you and your aunt and your cousin were in Miatin, how many of your other family members were in this massacre? You know, your grandfather or others?
The only one that survived was my grandfather's uncle. I mean, my grandfather's brother. His name was Shloima. My grandfather on my father's side. And I don't know how he survived. You know, these are things, they're part of our life, but when you're here and you're busy, and he eventually went to Israel, and he lived there, and he had a family, he had a wife and daughter that were killed during the massacre, but somehow, I don't know whether he was in hiding or with the partisans, he was younger than my grandfather. And one of my grandfather's other brothers went to Israel in the 1920s. So those are the only family and my mother's brothers that went to the army.
And everyone else was in your family
Everybody else was killed. My mother's sisters, my cousins, they all had children, they were all married, you know, and my grandfather that I adored, and all his sons except for my father.
So the farmer takes you in. Did your mother ever go back to Rovnov before hiding to find anybody?
My Aunt Sonia okay, another tough lady, decided she didn't know what happened to her husband. So she went back the next day and she asked, where are the Jews, whatever. And they told her where this massacre was. And she went there and she saw it, what happened. And she saw all the Ukrainians and taken all the goods that were left by the Jews.
Stop. So you talked about the massacre, and you've done some research. Do you want to share something that you'd like to talk about?
Yes. Well, my daughter, Debbie, was doing some research. She went to BU, Boston University, and there was a professor there that had done research on the Ravna massacre, and he wrote a book. And what I'm going to read is an eyewitness account that survived that massacre. And I like to read that because this kind of thing happened all over Eastern Europe. And this is where I feel a connection with this woman, whoever she is, wherever she is, because my dearest relatives were killed in this, and they were part of what she's talking about.
Okay.
And the name of the woman was Kristina Navakovska, and after the war, she was born in Ravna in 1929, and had been the best friend of Chaya Musman and Leah Boker. And here is her eyewitness account. On the 5th and 6th of November in 1944, notices were distributed that persons of Jewish nationality without certificate from their place of work were required to appear the next day at 6 o'clock in the morning on Castellana Square on Grubnik for evacuation from town. Before November 6, rumors had circulated around town that we were all to be deported somewhere. No one even had the thought that they were assembling us to be shot. On November 6th and 7th, our entire family, father, mother, sister, brother, uncle, aunt, walked to Castellana Square on Grubnik. A wet snow was falling, a fierce wind was blowing. It was still dark, but some thousands of people walked towards the square from all directions through the storm and bad weather. No one but Jews were on the street, since the order of the town had created an unusual situation. Moreover, it was still the restricted hours of persons of Jewish nationality. Men walked with bundles on their shoulders. The Germans had permitted us to take our valuables and a supply of food. Women walked carrying children in their arms. Old folks came too. The healthy carried the sick in their arms. Toward 10 o'clock in the morning, we finally reached the square. Even before arriving at the square, people began to sense something bad. All adjacent blocks had been sealed off by the SS and the local police. It was impossible to turn around and go back. The police would not have permitted it, and people were locked into such a dense mass that there was no room to move, let alone to walk against the flow. Pushed from behind and not seeing, the police pressed us into some sort of madness. Sometime between noon and 1 o'clock, the square was so packed with people, there was no more room. A German climbed on a hillock and told the assembled crowd through a megaphone that they must leave here in a heap on the square everything they had brought with them, the bundles, packages, and suitcases. Half an hour later, there had grown several mounds of such bundles. Next, they led us along 2 routes to the village of Sosanki, located 2 to 3 kilometers from town. Now,
Okay, sorry for the interruption. Can you continue?
Yes. Next, they led us along 2 chains and on the route to Sosanki. We were guarded by police and SS. There was no possibility of escape. As we approached Sosanki, we understood that we were walking to our death. Before my eyes appeared a nightmarish scene, one from which my blood freezes even now, many years later, though the threat of death has long passed. There was a ditch, perhaps 100 meters long. Logs had been thrown across the pit. On the logs stood 10 to 20 men, arranged with the back of their heads facing us. There was a long volley from Tommy guns, and the people fell into the pit like mowed ears of corn. Not far from the ditch were several more pits. Everyone was forced to undress stark naked and walk to the edge of the pit, men and women separately. Every executioner practiced his own special type of murder. Some lined their victims up along the edge of the pit, facing forwards, and the Germans, by turn, shot each in the back of the head. Others stood their victims on their knees in front of the pit, while others forced their victims to run towards the pit and shot them as they approached the edge, and so on. Some threw young children alive into the pit, while others hurled them in the air, shot them in flight. All of this was accompanied by deathly groans and screams of the dying and the laughter of the executioner. If one of the doomed tried to run off to the side, they shot him. Work in this way for about 2 hours. The German would walk up to the table, drink a glass of vodka, snack on a sandwich, then continue his vile work anew. As night fell, naked and at the limits of exhaustion from what I seen, I lost consciousness. I was saved that night by some sort of miracle. I crawled between the lines of police and reached my friends who lived on the edge of town. My entire family and all my relatives had been shot, with 17,500 Jews of Ravna. I do not know the name of the executioners. They were SS men, Gestapo, Ukrainian police. The shooting went on for almost 3 days. And my family was killed in that massacre.
I know this, reading that, you imagine your family there.
Yes.
When
I do. I know that I was told that my grandfather stood at the edge of that pit with his arms around all his sons while they were being shot.
When the farmer's son came back from having to deal with the massacre, did he tell your mother and your aunt what he saw too? Do you know?
I assume he did. I don't remember. You know, they probably had us in another room playing while adults were talking, you know.
So you have read this eyewitness testimony.
Yes, and I also have a book written by I don't know if he was a priest or some sort of, you know, in the church, that interviewed a man who had been a German engineer in Ravna. And he saved about 200 people because he had workers. He was working on the railroads and things like that. And he happened to come into town when this was happening. And he went along the line. He told the guards, these are my workers and I need them. And he just pulled people out of line.
So you've read this story. I know we're going to go back to this point in time later on. You went back to Ravna. Did you go to where this massacre site had been?
Yes, yes, yes.
And how did you feel, and what did it look like?
It was acres and acres of ground, you know. You could almost see the rise of where these ditches were. You know, there was grass over them and all, but there was a rise.
And I know we're also going to talk about this later, but was there any marker or anything?
Yes, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of markers that had names of the people who were killed. And, you know, the Germans were so good in keeping records that they... So I went around, I spent, you know, a long time there, and I found my grandfather's name on one of the markers.
And what was his name?
His name was Aaron.
Aaron's Wiener?
And my daughter Julie is named after him.
Anything else you want to share about that moment, finding his name, being at that place and time?
It was, you know, didn't seem real. That's all I can tell you. We had a group with, well, the second day maybe. I went to I met the Chabad rabbi there. I met some Jewish people at the community center, and they came out and we said Kaddish. And that was very emotional for me to be able to say Kaddish at that place. And it was very emotional, very emotional. I don't know how I got through it, but I did. And it's like, you know, you separate yourself out from everybody and what's going on, and you become focused in that moment and what your feelings are, and how it's so hard to explain what you feel at that moment, but you feel a great sadness and a great loss, a big loss of what could have been. And, you know, how these lives were taken. Yeah.
But you will always be his cookie or kukla, right? Yeah.
Well, it's, you know, when I was a teenager, it was very hard for me because I didn't have family, you know. My father's family, I mean, it was wonderful. They brought us over and all, but they were Americans. They couldn't understand me, particularly as a teenager, and they weren't very nice to me, in a sense. Now I realize, as I got older, why they acted the way they did. But at that time, I was looking for acceptance. And, you know, I wasn't getting the kind of acceptance that I needed, that I didn't have. And I try to understand very hard why it happened. Why could people be so cruel to other people and children and all? And finally, I just gave up. And my husband used to say, every so often I get into this place and he says, it's your what's it all about mood.
So, so we're going to come back to America a little later, but I want to go just back a little bit to Rovna. So,
Okay.
So in Rovna, your mother leaves, and did she bury anything? Did she think she would be coming back? Or
Oh, sure.
Can you talk
She
about
buried
that?
her jewelry, and after the war, she dug it up, and she had her diamond ring, and whatever. And I think I told you, my Aunt Sonia buried her silver and jewelry in the village. And when I went back, I took a metal detector and we tried to dig it up, but I think someone got there before us.
Right. So they buried, they're leaving, whatever they take with them. Did you take any doll or toy or anything that was yours that?
No, I had nothing.
Okay. And the farmer took you in, your grandfather, you said, had negotiated. Did the farmer also expected to be paid, or did you have to give him any goods to hide you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I always wondered, you know, I went back and I met with his grandson, and because the farmer and his wife died soon after we left, you know, Ukraine. And I said, he was the only one his aunt told about us. The other part of the family was very anti-Semitic. And so they didn't know the father was hiding us. They lived in other villages and they were older, they were married. And I said to him, why do you think your grandfather and grandmother did this? And he said, I think he just couldn't turn out two cute little girls.
So here we are, it's 1941, you're 4 years old. The farmer says he'll take you in. Talk about the moment where he starts preparing a place for you to live and where he hides you at first. The farmer in the barn.
Where he hid us in the
Yes.
barn. We were on top of the barn at the back, and we had like the eaves of the barn, and that's where we had air and light. We had
And there were 4 of you, right?
4 of us, my mother, myself, my aunt, and my cousin. The space was small, because if you saw the picture of the barn wasn't that big. And because it was at the top of the barn or whatever, it wasn't room for the adults to stand up. Of course, we were little, we could stand up and look out the eaves. And what I remember, I think I said earlier, was when Raya and I got back and saw the barn and got in, saw the house and all, the thing we said, we remember the cold and we remember the heat, But you know, I know we didn't have much to eat, but I don't remember the hunger. And what I remember that bothered me the most were the rats and the mice and the lice, because there were so many of them, and at night I would just be throwing them off my face, And
How frightening was that?
it wasn't frightening, it was annoying, very annoying, you know. I wasn't afraid of them, I just wanted them not to bother me. I was trying to sleep. You know, I was a child.
What did your mother and or aunt tell you? Like, could you go outside during the day, or you hid
No.
at night?
No,
What was
we
that
never
like?
were allowed to go outside. I remember standing by that little window, you know, and watching the chickens and the cats playing outside. It was beautiful and sunny. And I used to beg her. I said, I'll be so good, I promise. Just let me go out. The chickens and the kitty cats are out there playing, and why can't I go out?
What about food? Did the farmers bring you food? Did your mother go out and gather food for you?
Well, my aunt and mother did something, but not that much. He brought us food. And I just found out recently, I know I never liked beets. I hate beets. But my cousin told me that's all we had was beets. And I said, beets? Oh, I can't imagine. And then I was a fussy eater on top of it. I would not eat, sometimes they'd get a rabbit and make rabbit stew. I would not eat that. I would not eat bread with seeds, because the word for seeds and the word for mines, you know, that blow up, is the same. So I never ate bread with seeds. And I became malnourished, I really did. And my aunt, you know, said to my mother, you're gonna have to kill her. You're gonna have to strangle her, because she's endangering all of us. And my mother said, you know, I'm going to take my chances and go in the woods with the partisans. There was a friend of our farmer that used to sometimes help with food and bring us food. And he came that particular day, and she was saying goodbye to him. And, you know, she told him the whole thing. And he says, don't go yet. And he went and he actually stole from his neighbors milk and cottage cheese and eggs and all. And they brought me back to normal.
Wow. What about bathing or toileting? If you could just remember or describe, if you're comfortable.
Well, I don't remember. We had pots that we, you know, used for bathroom, and we must have had water to wash up. But as far as taking a bath or a shower, I don't remember. The problem, as I mentioned, was with lice. It was really pretty bad. And the farmer's daughter would take our clothes, because we only had one set of clothes, and we would wrap up in blankets, and she would take them and put them in the oven to kill the lice.
What about your hair and the lice? Was it always itchy? And
Oh
all of
yeah,
that?
terrible. I had my head shaved when we came out of hiding, because they couldn't get rid of the lice.
How did that feel, to have it cut off? Did you think about it? No. So
Yeah, I didn't like it,
No.
but you know, the funny part I remember is really, I don't know, I have to go with, I don't
No.
my mother used to wash my hair with gasoline, okay, because that was supposed to kill the lice, okay.
This was when you were hiding.
No, after we came out.
Oh, okay, after.
And I love the smell of gasoline, but then they had to cut my hair.
Right. So you're in the barn. Did you, what changed? Was there ever, let me ask the question, were there ever moments that somebody came and inspected while you were in the barn?
Oh, yes,
Can you
yes.
tell about any of those moments?
Yes, yes. We were in the barn, and as you know, the Germans would come and look for Jews in all the villages. And there was one time that we heard them come into the barn, a couple of Germans, and they were sticking their bayonets into the straw. They were on the ladder, and we thought that was it. And then he got bored and left. A second time was a lot more frightening. The farmer came up and said that they knew we were there. Someone had informed on us. They were waiting outside, and we should come down. And our mother said, well, can we have a few minutes to say goodbye to each other? And he said, sure. So I guess I was 5 and I was 6. I don't know where this came from, but we started to cry and beg our mothers not to go down quietly and give up. We just knew there was a back door to the barn, and we wanted to go into the woods and let them chase us. And somehow we convinced them. And we walked down the ladder very quietly, and we went out, because they wouldn't have expected us to be doing that, And we hid in the woods that night. And we could hear them looking for us, but something must have diverted them. And then when morning came, the farmer found us. And we couldn't go back to the barn then. So the wheat was very high. It was August. It was very hot. And he said, go and hide in the wheat till I figure something out. And we did. And then for 3 days, we had nothing to eat or drink. It was very hot. We would just suck the grass to get some moisture. Anyway, he found us after 3 days. And, he got tired of giving the Germans his grain and his corn and his wheat. So he had dug out a bunker underground, and he put all his, wheat and stuff in there. So he said, I'll dig another one. He dug another one right next to it. And it was covered with trees and branches and all, And that's where he put us. And it has straw on the ground. And that was a lot worse than the barn.
I mean, how tall was the bunker? Did you have to be on?
No, the bunker was tall enough for us to stand up, yeah.
Okay.
And, but it was hard to go. There was a tunnel to get through, to get food or, whatever. We had to crawl one way and crawl backwards the other way, and it was just us little girls. It was small. Anyway, that was awful because it was dark and damp, and the war was coming to an, the liberation some parts of Europe, and I was just scared that they would put a machine gun on top of it and it'd fall down and kill us, or they would be shooting at the machine gun that's there, because the fighting was going on all around us and we could hear it. And my aunt got very sick. I mean, we were starving. Food was non-existent. And the mice and the rats were so much worse because of the grain and stuff. They were just overwhelming.
So
I have some more. Can we stop?
let's stop. Yeah, let's get some. So here you are, a young child, and your cousin. And how did you stay quiet? How did you know? What did your mother tell you, about? being
Well,
quiet?
we knew we had fear. We did have fear because we could hear things that were going on in the woods. The Germans were capturing people and torturing them, and one of them was my mother's sister who was coming to us trying to escape. So, you know, you learn that. I mean, and we played with the straw. We made dolls and animals and things like that. And our mothers were very good at telling stories, Bible stories, all kinds of stories, you know, fairy tales. And we just, I don't know, we just sat there, you know. We got out a couple times when it got real cold. I remember this happening. It was, we went to the farmer's place, and I don't know how to explain this, but they had these ovens, you know, to cook and bake in, and then there was a shelf like this made out of, you know, like building material, where you could keep things warm and all that, but it was pretty substantial. So I was on that shelf, and my mother was, and I fell asleep. My mother was hiding in one of the closets, because what happened was that a whole group of these young men, like forest rangers, came over to visit, okay? And they're drinking and having a grand time. And I wake up, and through the little slit, now there's like a drape across, I see a gun, you know, a rifle. And I start making noise, crying and whatever. And the farmer's wife finally said, oh, she has to go to the bathroom, and she's ashamed because you're here. So they left. I mean, amazing. They didn't want to see me or anything, you know. She said it was one of her grandchildren. And then another time, the other farmer that I told you about that brought the food, and he took us to his house because it was so cold and snowy, and it was awful. So during the day, we were on the attic of his house. And my mother kept saying, don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep. It was very cold, very cold. And of course, I fell asleep and all. And it was time for them to take us down for the evening into the house. And I was frozen stiff. I mean, they thought I had, you know, died. And they took me down. And I remember hearing them speak, but I couldn't say anything. And they were only worried about how they were going to bury me, you know, and the snow was like really high. And then the daughter-in-law, the farmer's daughter-in-law, said, let's try something. Let's rub her with the snow and see if we can get her revived. And they did. And I still have, my hands and feet are very sensitive to cold.
Just amazing. What the generosity of these people to help you during the cold. I mean, Rovno was what
amazing.
temperature?
And you know, this farmer, I found out, the Germans made him mayor of the region, and you know what would have happened to him if they had found out he was helping it.
Right. So you moved, so before we go more into the bunker, how long were you in the hayloft, in the barn?
Well, the total was 28 months.
Between the two?
20 months in the hayloft, and 8 months in the bunker.
Do you ever remember your mother doing anything special when it was your birthday, when you were in the hayloft? Nothing like, here's a special straw thing I made for you?
Nothing. No.
So here you are in the hayloft that you could see out. The bunker was underground, right? It was dark. Were you underground for all those months?
Yes.
How did you
We had a
adapt the
candle.
dark and the light?
Well, we had a little light came through, but we had a candle we could light an hour a day.
And when you came out of the bunker, how was your vision going from night to day?
I couldn't see. I was blinded. When we came out of the bunker and the farmer took us, it was February and snow was on the ground and I was just totally blind.
What was that feeling like, coming out and not seeing?
Cold. I want you to know, cold. Cold is always what I
Right.
remember. You know.
And in the bunker, was it warmer because it was underground? How did you get warm in the bunker?
Yeah, it was warmer, but it was still very cold. You know, Ukraine gets pretty cold, you know.
And how did you stay warm then if it was so cold? Did you just huddle together?
We had a blanket, one blanket.
And what did you sleep on, the ground or the...
Straw. Yeah.
I know you were young, but did you ever ask, like, how much longer? It's like, you know, in the car today, when will we get there? Do you remember asking anything like that?
It's interesting, but I always believed we were going to be freed. I always had a positive thing that soon this will be over. And I'm not going to really share with this, but I did have a dream that we were going to be freed in 6 weeks, and we were. And my cousin, see, a lot of things I talk about, people look at me and they say, well, I don't remember anything when I was 4 years old or 5 years old. My memories start at 7. And when we connected with Raya, we shared the same memories. So I felt validated in a sense, yeah.
So you're in the bunker and the hay and you're there. What moment did you learn? What's the story of how you learned that you could be free from there? And what's that
Well, you
whole
know,
scene?
we kept hearing the fighting going on around us because it was the Ukrainian army that liberated us in 1944, February 44. And so we knew it was coming to an end. You know, we kind of knew that, you know, like I said, I was afraid that we'd get caught up in the machine gun fights, but we knew that they were, you know, going. I guess the farmer must have told us that they were.
Did he call you, come out of the bunker?
No.
So how did you know to leave the bunker?
Okay, so finally, when the you know, was liberated, the farmer took our mothers into town to see if it was safe. And we were still on the farm and made up a signal where we should meet if it was safe. And then he came back, and the second day he put us in the wagon, covered us with straw, and took us to town.
And town was Rovno?
And we, you know, met with our mothers. And of course there was so much, you know, I couldn't walk because I had sores all over my legs from not exercising and walking. And I got typhoid, I got pneumonia. And you know, you couldn't really go to the hospital there because they would kill you. I mean, whatever, they didn't have good service. But my mother found a doctor on the street and brought him to me and saved me. And, you know, there were bombs still falling for 9 months because the war wasn't over.
So your mother and aunt left, and they went to Rovno, and where did they live?
Our house was still standing, and we moved into it.
No one else was living in it? No one took it over?
They just emptied it out, but it was still there.
And did they find the jewelry that your mother buried?
Well, my mother had her diamond ring, so I don't know what she did. You know, it was not something I was interested in.
So the four of you are in Rovnovac in the house, and that's 1944, February. So what happens? The war's not over everywhere, so what happened while you were in the house? You said bombs and everything?
There were bombs every night, and we would go to the basement of the house or the Catholic church. And
Did people know you were back and that you were Jewish? Did your neighbors tell on you? Or
I don't know. I don't know. I remember certain incidents. There was for some reason, there was a rabbit coat, you know, that my mother, that I found, and it was mine for some reason, I don't know. And we were walking on the street, and it was cold out, you know, and this Russian woman came up and said, "That's my coat, it belongs to my daughter," and took us to the police station and had my coat taken away. I mean, the Russians were terrible. And then my mother, in order for us to survive, would go to the market, buy food, and cook it, and she would have soldiers come and eat.
Russian soldiers?
Russian soldiers, Ukrainians, you know. And that's how she was able for us to survive. And I had a very hard time because I thought my father was dead. And because I was a cute little girl, the soldiers would want me to sit on their lap and whatever, you know, they probably had families. And I would just hate them, absolutely hate them, because they were there. And then they wanted my mother to become an informer because she was having all these soldiers. And she absolutely refused, and they harassed her.
Who wanted her to be an informer? The
The
resistance?
Soviets.
The Soviets,
Russia.
I see.
And she just hated it. I mean, you know, she didn't want any part of it. And we moved around. The bombs were so terrible that our mothers decided to move to a smaller town so it wouldn't be so bad. And the next day, a bomb fell on our house and destroyed it.
Did you ever get hurt by any of the bombing or any of
A
the...
shrapnel. You know, I have a funny story that we were running because the bombs were falling. And we were running away from the area, and it was nighttime, and you could see the flames and all that. And shrapnel kept hitting me. Shrapnel kept falling. And I kept screaming to my mother, "I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead." And she would say, "Shut up and run."
Okay, so you and your mother, your aunt, and your cousin go back to Rovno. You're in the house and the bombing. I wanted to ask you, after being in the bunker and it being dark, do you have any moments of claustrophobia or not wanting to be in dark places or anything like that?
Well, sometimes I do have a claustrophobic feeling. Yeah, I was in Egypt, and I went into one of the things, and the guy turned off the light, and I panicked. I needed to get out of there. And this happened to me also in Algeria. I was in one of the, tunnels, and I guess that's what I don't like, underground.
And so also when you went back to Rovno, all four of you, did you hide because you didn't want them to know you're back, or did you go outside? Did Any reaction to you being back, and especially being Jewish in the town when you came back?
No, everybody was trying to survive. You know what? At that point, I think it was just trying to have food and clothing and a place to live. And everybody was, you know, because it was a war. You know,
Even the
war
non-Jews were struggling
yeah,
too.
also for the non-Jews. It was really not, you know, not everybody loved the Germans, let me
Right.
tell you something. And I don't remember, I just remember our little family. I don't remember anybody else.
And then you
I went to first grade in Russian
in Rovno?
in Rovna right after the war. And I learned the Russian alphabet.
So when you went to first grade, the Russians were in charge of the city and
Right.
they organized the schools?
Oh, yeah. And I don't know. They called my mother because I memorized everything and wouldn't learn to read. So that was just. So then when we went to Poland, I wouldn't go to school because it's a different alphabet. And I said, you know, I don't need this.
So you mentioned earlier that you thought your father was
dead.
Dead. What did your mother tell you? That he was away?
She thought the same thing, you know. She really, you know, we didn't hear from him. We didn't hear, you know, well, there was very little communication. Yeah.
So you leave the bunker February of '44. The war is not over everywhere. You go to Rovno, you move around, you go to school. At what point did you get liberated a second time? The war is over. Can you talk about that?
Okay, well, one of my mother's brothers, David, the one that lived with us, came back from the war.
Lived with you before the war.
Right, exactly. And
Came back from, sorry, from where? Where did David come back from?
the Russian army.
Okay.
It was 1945, okay. My mother got tired of them harassing her about being an informer. And so she and David and I, Stalin made a pact, not a pact, but a thing that said anybody who was born a Polish citizen could go to Poland. And it just so happened that we were born during the time our area was part of Poland. So my mother and David, Uncle David and me, we went to Poland. My aunt and my cousin, my aunt became a photographer. She had kind of settled in. She went to a small town. She met this man, and I don't know why. She didn't want to leave. She was okay. She had established herself there. And that was 1945. We separated, never knew anything about each other, okay? We're in Poland. My mother and her brother opened like a little cafe. And I don't want to go to school because it's a different alphabet. So they put me with a Roma lady, a gypsy lady, and I had so much fun. It was great. And then my uncle got married, just saw the pictures, you know, he met this woman. And then he was sick. He had both lungs shut through, and they said there was a doctor in Berlin that could help him. So he and his wife went to Berlin. My mother was staying in Poland. And then one day, we heard a knock on the door, and it was my father. Now, you have to realize I don't even remember him because he left when I was 2 years old. So anyway, my father came, and we're in Poland. And
Do you know how he found you?
yes, he went back to Rovna, and some of the people knew where we were. They told him, yeah, you know, some of the survivors. So what happened then was some of the survivors from Poland came and wanted to reclaim their property, you know. And the Poles are very anti-Semitic. They didn't want to give it up. And so they started a pogrom, you know, a killing. And they killed 60 Jews in this small little town. And so my mother and father said, this is not a safe place for us either. So they made their way with me to the American zone in Germany, where we were placed in displaced persons camps. That's people without a country that were looking for a country. We were in a camp called Pocking.
And what year was this that you went there?
1946.
So you were 9 years old?
Right. And it was the first time that I ever had a toy, and the first time that I ever had a friend. And my toy was a ball, a small ball, that we spent all day hitting against the wall. I remember that. We lived in German army barracks, you know, 1 room per family. And, you know, we had a shower, you know, for the whole community, 1 for women and 1 for men. We had 2 bathrooms, 1 on each side of the barrack. And I think it was the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, that took care of us, and the American government. And I learned something very interesting, I think. We had a fence around our camp, and you had to get permission to leave the camp. And I found out that General George Patton was assigned right after the war to be in charge of these DP camps. And he put fences around them because he didn't want a Jewish scum to be mixing with the Germans. Can you believe that? And then they took them off it. They found that out. But there still were fences.
Right. So I want to go back just one question. Where were you when the war was finally over and there was...
I was in Rovna.
So you were in Rovna. Do you remember, were there parades on the street? Were any celebration?
Yeah, I guess there were. I remember everybody was happy.
Okay. So when your parents and you went to Germany, did they have to get permission to go to that camp ahead of time, or did they just hope they would get in? Do you know if they had to do anything?
They would just hope they get in, yeah.
And how many people, to the best of your knowledge, were in this?
It was a big camp. Yeah, it was a very, it's a well-known camp, yeah. We were there, and then we were in 2 smaller camps, but not for long. We were one in Schwäbisch Hall, which was lovely. It was in the Bavaria Mountains, and it was like a little house or something. But we weren't there for more than a month or 2. And then we were in Ulm, which was very ugly. But Pocking was our main, we were there 3 years.
Okay, so you went when you were 9. And what did you do those 3 years in the camp? Did you go to school? Did you have
whenever there was a teacher, we'd go to school. And I had 2 friends. And
What language did you speak there, do you know?
It's a good question. Yiddish, I think. Yeah, Yiddish. And I learned how to ride a bike. There were celebrations, you know, they celebrated the Jewish holidays, like I remember Simchas Torah and things like that. And I remember one year we had a camp, you know, they took us to camp, which was nice. And it was wonderful. For me, it was wonderful, you know.
So did
I
you,
mean, we didn't have much space. It was a room, small room, you know. Yeah.
did your parents work, or how did they
Yeah,
get
my
food
father
and
worked.
everything?
Yeah, my father worked.
In the camp or outside?
In the camp, yeah, in the
And-
camp.
And what kind of business did he have?
What?
What did he do? What
I
kind of
don't
work?
know. I don't know. I didn't ask.
Were you happy there?
Yes, I was. I was happy there, you know. I was free. You know, I didn't have restrictions. You know, it was all Jewish, you know, all kinds of Jews from all over. My parents had friends, you know.
Were there different type of Jewish religion, Jewish faith?
Oh yeah, we had some ultra-Orthodox Hasidim, you know. And my friends used to try and make, you know, games with them, you know, to give them a hard time. Anyway.
So here you are, this journey now, you're in Germany, Pocking, and here you are in the U.S. So can you tell us how your family came to the U.S.? What was
Okay.
that story?
That story. So actually, my parents, like I said earlier, loved Israel, were Zionists, and wanted to go to Israel. Israel was not a state yet, but there were people leaving the camps in illegal boats. But the British didn't want them to come, so they would capture the boats and send them to Cyprus. And sometimes there were some fights and shooting, and people would get killed or hurt, you know. So my father got us a space on one of these boats. And we were all excited. We were all packed, ready to go to Israel. And I woke up in the morning and I had the mumps. So we had to give our space to somebody else. And unfortunately, the boat was captured by the British, and there was some fighting on it. And they sent him to Cyprus. So my parents said, they're not trying that again. And my father knew that he had 3 uncles in the United States, his father's brothers. And so he went to the Red Cross and got the phone books. He knew they lived in Philadelphia or New York. And as you know, my last name was Weiner. And it was Louis, Jacob, and Abraham Weiner. And he used the Polish alphabet, which is similar to English, and in Yiddish, wrote letters, hundreds of them, and sent them out to the United States to these 3 men. And the ironic part is that my future husband, his father's name was Louis, and they got one of these letters, and they didn't, his mother and father didn't know Yiddish, but his grandfather did. And he came over and he read the letter and he said, and my husband remembers as a 10-year-old listening to it, that, oh, this is some unfortunate soul, but he's not related to us.
So can you give us an essence of what the letter asked for? What did the letter say?
The letter said, my name is such and such, and first it started off, I'm looking for someone who will help me. I know that I have uncles named such and such in the United States, and I hope that it will reach you. And then he wrote, my mother was Gisel, my father was this, my sister was this, we lived in such and such a town. And at the end he says, I hope you will save us. And he gave, the address and the name and all that.
So
it wasn't a long letter.
Yeah, so this letter looking for a family member to sponsor you.
Right.
And we're going to go back to your future husband. His family received the letter, but you weren't, because he was a Wiener too,
Yeah,
right?
he was a Wiener, but they were not from that. They were from Russia. His grandfather was, and you know, there was no relationship whatsoever that sounded anything like it.
And did the letters go back to the Red Cross if there was someone interested, or to the camp?
No,
To the camp?
no.
So here he's writing these hundreds of letters. What happened when there was someone had thought it was you? I mean, how did you? Did he ever
Well,
find
they
anybody?
answered us. They answered us.
So tell us about that.
Well, they said,
Who answered you?
okay, my father's cousin. She was living with her father, with her family, husband and 2 sons. Her name was Mary, and Mary wrote to my father saying, yes, you are my father's nephew, and we will try and get you, sponsors. They needed a sponsors for a job. They needed to make sure they had a place to live. They needed to make sure that they didn't become a burden on the state. And you had to have all that documented and send it to the American embassy, I guess, or whatever. And it took over a year to do all that. And they brought us over to the United States. We came in October of '49. We came on the SS Stuart, which was an Army transport boat. The ship was, the passage was horrible. Everybody was sick. We weren't used, to the American food, white bread and all that, and people were sick. I remember just laying on the deck the whole time being sick. We got here on October the 13th.
What port did you?
We ended up at Ellis Island. We're still taking people in at Ellis Island. And we couldn't disembark because it was Columbus Day. So we saw the Statue of Liberty, and we had to just sit on the boat till the next day. And our relatives had come to pick us up. They didn't realize, and they had to go back, Anyway, we got off at Ellis Island, and Ellis Island was this just great big hall, empty, really. And of course, nobody spoke English, my parents, and my mother had brought some stuff with us, like she brought a feather bed, and pillows, and a set of dishes, and anyway, she was only worried where it was and kept sending me to talk to people, which I had no idea how to talk. But anyway, everything worked out. They got their stuff, and the relatives came back and picked us up.
What was
It's the first time I was in a car.
Yeah, so when you went, let me go back and ask this. When you went from Romanov to the DP camp, how did you travel? By train, by?
Mostly by train and sometimes by truck.
And then when you were in the DP camp, how did you get to the boat? What kind, was there a port? Did you have to go somewhere else?
Yeah, we went to Bremerhaven, which is a port, and we must have taken a train.
Mm-hmm. So how long was the boat?
Sure.
The trip on the boat to the
About
US?
13, 14 days.
Mm-hmm. And where, was it, what kind of boat was it?
It was an Army transport. It was a very bare bones boat. There were no luxuries on this. It wasn't a cruise, let me tell you that much.
And did you have a sense of excitement about going to America? Did you know what was, at that age?
I think I was too sick to be excited about anything. Mm-hmm. And I don't get seasick. It's not my normal thing, but we hit some rough seas.
And had you known about the Statue of Liberty before you came? And when you saw it,
Yes,
did you have
we had a
sense?
radio, and I actually listened to Ben Gurion's speech. And at that time, I was studying some Hebrew, so I knew some. I understood a couple of words and things. It was very exciting for me because I just wanted to go to Israel. That's all, that's all I wanted to do. And it was in my bones or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So you come to America, then these cousins and family pick you up, and they, you said first time in a car?
First time in a car. We drive from New York to Philadelphia, sick again. But the point was, we get into the cousin's house, okay, in Philadelphia, and I never believed in television. I said, what kind of nonsense is this, sending pictures over the air? Well, they had a television, and I sat down and watched it. And then the two things I remember, I had never seen wallpaper. I had never seen big mirrors, just handheld mirrors. Stairs, in a sense, the way. I'd never tasted like sour cream. There were a lot of new things, that I didn't know about. The same aunt took me and she registered me in school there, the 7th grade. Well, of course, I didn't know anything. So she said to me, Rachel, that's not an English name. We're going to call you Rochelle. So she changed my name to Rochelle. And when I was 18, I had to go to the court and have it, changed legally. I was the only immigrant in my school. The kids were nice. I don't know if they weren't, I wouldn't know. I remember the first day I went there, they wanted to treat me to lunch. And I knew some words in English, and they wanted to get me a hot dog. And I said, oh my God, they eat dogs here. No, thank you, I'm not hungry, And I met a couple of girls that I walked to school with, and eventually just, my big big aim was to become an American teenager. And so, I met some girls, and we had like a girls' club with the jackets and that whole, 50s thing. And, everything was okay, except for my trying to understand the Holocaust.
So when you moved to Philadelphia, did they set you up in your own apartment or a
Yes,
home?
set us up in an apartment. My father got a job on the subway, working 50 cents an hour. My mother got a job in a factory, a blouse factory. Neither one of them spoke a word of English. My poor mother, every time people were laughing, they thought they were laughing at her. And she would get very upset. Money, of course, was very, very strict. And every penny counted because they needed money for the subway and the, bus and all that. And, I knew all that. I bought my own clothes, whatever I wanted. I babysat. I had a job when I was in high school, I understood the situation. And eventually my parents got to the point they saved enough money. Well, my father moved up in his job and became, he learned carpentry and he became like a manager on a working site for a big company that was building homes. And he was in the carpenters union, so they had health care and, all kinds of, but we moved, the first apartment we had was a basement, and was really, and then we got an apartment on the second floor, but it had only one bedroom, and then it had a big closet with a mirror, and that was my bedroom.
How did you learn English? Because you have no accent, really.
I just picked it up. That's all I can say. I don't know how. I didn't study with anybody. I didn't have a teacher. I didn't have anything.
And you had so many different schools that you went to between all the places that you lived.
Well, that they weren't real.
How did you
Steady.
finally adapt
To school.
to school in the U.S.? Did you have tutors?
You know
or-
what? I was a very obedient child. And I never acted out or anything. I just did what I was asked. And I know that there were a couple things that I had like a special needs teacher for, but not for English, because I didn't have it then. So, you know, the first 6 months were tough, very tough. I didn't know what the heck was going on. I mean, and then after that, it was just kind of smooth sailing in a way.
So, so here you are, the four of you live in the barn in the bunker. You all go to Rovna. You then go to Germany. Your Sonia and Raya stay there.
Right.
And at this point, at this point in your life, you don't know what happens to
Right.
them. And I'm going to fast forward to how you learn about what happened to them.
Okay.
If you could talk about that.
So my mother stayed in touch with a farmer's daughter who lived on the farm, and we would send her packages and things. But she had no idea where Raya and her mother and...
So when your mother sent packages, did she gone back there and she just started sending them food as a thank you for all they did for all of you? Your mother sent food packages to the farmer?
No, she sent things that they could sell,
I
like
see.
jeans and fabric and whatever, was some...
As a
that
way
she-
to thank them for what they did?
Yeah, well, of course, you know.
Okay.
And it wasn't easy because it was Soviet Union. You couldn't just go to the post office. You had to go through special people to do
Well,
this.
I thank you for letting me divert. I just want to explain the
divert.
packages.
Yeah. Anyway, so my aunt and my cousin and the man my aunt was married to moved to St. Petersburg,
Russia.
Russia, and we had no idea. That's where my cousin went to college and all that, met her husband and got married. Blah. So we had no idea where they were. They had no idea where we were. Well, in the late 60s, my mother goes to Israel, and she's walking on the street in Tel Aviv, and a man recognizes her, and he comes over to her, and he says, "I know where your sister is. I just saw her a couple weeks ago." And he gives my mother the address. My mother writes, and my aunt writes back. And my mother goes to Russia,
What year is this now?
maybe 70, 71. And
And she went alone to Russia?
she went the first
To
time
see-
alone.
To see her sister Sonia.
Yeah, to see her sister. And she didn't know there was a brother that lived in Tashkent, Shlomo, who came to St. Petersburg. And they had a reunion. And when they saw each other, they were shocked because they thought the other was dead. You know, there was no way. And then the first time my mother went, she couldn't stay with them. She had to stay in a hotel because those were the rules. So I wanted to go, And it took me 9 months to get a visa to go and stay with them. And so I went back with my mother. I thought it was 1974, and spent 3 weeks there. And my uncle came again from Tashkent, and
And how old were you in this time period?
I had 3 kids. I was married. I was living in Greensboro. Yeah.
And you reunite with
Right.
this family when, how many years have passed? Oh my
Since
God.
45
Since 45? 30, over 30?
years.
5 years, really.
I know. It was amazing. And then we told them that if things were getting bad for Jews in Russia, you know, they were losing their jobs and all kinds of things. And we said when they wanted to come, we would help them. And, you know, we could call them on the phone once in a while, and we wrote back and forth. And, you know, I decided to study Russian, and I had a professor who would translate the letters for me. Anyway, in 1980, we got a message that they were ready to come. And they came with a group to Italy. And then my uncle, great uncle in Israel, sponsored them. But they didn't go to Israel, they came here in 1980.
So what was that moment of that reunion when you hugged Raya after
Well, you mean in Russia?
in Russia?
Amazing, amazing, just amazing. She never thought we were alive. She just, you know, and we just were so happy to have family of some sort.
So then they end up in Italy, and you were able to sponsor them to come to the
Right.
U.S.
Actually, my husband and I went to Italy to meet them, and so they'd feel more comfortable, you know, as to who we were and everything. And then they came. Well, we actually settled them in Philadelphia first, because they had a school for English as a second language, and we didn't have anything here. And then 6 months later, they came here.
So your transition, their transition was they had to come from the
Was very-
Soviet to here. Was it a harder transition?
Very hard for them. I know my poor cousin, who's a very independent person, of course, said, I feel like a baby. Everything I have to learn. They didn't know about the food when they went to the grocery store. There's this, you know, 6 different cheeses. How do I know which is a good cheese? You know, there's 20 different breads. There's everything that, when I was with her in Russia, she worked, and she would go after work every night to stand in line to get potatoes or whatever they were selling, whatever. I wanted to go to Moscow. I figured I'm here, I want to, yeah. Well, I didn't get permission to go. I could go, but they wouldn't give me a hotel. Okay. So I said, we're going to Moscow. So we went to Moscow, the 2 of us. We got there. We somehow finagled ourselves a hotel and near Red Square. And then she went out because she heard that the department store was selling boots. She spent the entire day waiting in line to get a pair of boots. I just wandered around Moscow. And because I tried not to wear, you know, clothes but I get yelled at about being an American. And anyway, it was a great experience.
So I'm going to come back and ask some other questions, but do you want to talk about a second reunion you had? Because Raya and Sonia, that was the family you had left.
Right.
But there was a second reunion that you had talked about, the nephew of...
In Israel?
In Israel.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about reunions of family
Reunion.
members.
Well, he went to Israel with his mother from Poland.
Who's he?
My cousin. His name is Jacob Susna. And
he was the son of who?
he was the son of my mother's brother,
By the name of
Herzig.
Hersek. Okay.
And
And Hersek didn't survive the war.
he did survive, but he stayed in Poland.
Okay.
He never came to Germany with us and whatever. He remained in Poland, got married, had a son, and we never knew. He was supposed to come the next day, but he never did. And he married a much younger woman. Anyway, they got divorced. And my cousin Jacob and his mother went to Israel. She was a doctor, she practiced medicine. He went to medical school. He went to school in Boston too for postgraduate work, speaks English. And he knew nothing about his father's family, nothing. He just remembers meeting his father once when he was 4 years old. So he decided to research and see if there are any relatives on his father's side. And he, through some grapevine way of looking, they looked at cemeteries. My cousin's last name is Kishnerman, which is an unusual name. They found her husband's grave in our Jewish cemetery, so you knew there was a Greensburg connection and whatever. And he saw the video that you saw that Ed Serrata did, and he emailed me and said that he thought we were related. And then I emailed him back and asked him to call us, to give me his number. I would call him and what day was good. And I called him and we talked, and my cousin Raya was here. And we all decided that we would do a genetic test. So he sent us the 23andMe, and we turned out to be all first cousins, 99.9%, and coming from the same region, Ashkenazi Jews, Eastern Europe. So we started communicating, and then he and his wife and his son came here to Greensboro. I had my whole family here, all my children and grandchildren and in-laws, and spent a wonderful 4 days. And when he walked in, my cousin and I looked at him and we said, he's our family. He looked just like our other uncles. I mean, it's hard for me. I have the pictures and I have to think which one is which. So anyway, we've been communicating all this time. And 2 years ago, I went with 2 of my daughters he found another cousin of ours in London. So I went to London to meet this cousin. And then I went to Israel, and we had a wonderful time.
So what are the parallels you see between your father writing a letter and now this cousin? Were you curious? Of somebody just writing you? What made you decide to call him back and talk to him?
Well, I just had a feeling that this is legitimate. My kids thought it was a scam. Don't answer it. Don't do this, people. And I thought, no, I don't have much family. And if it turns out, a scam, it's a scam. I'm not giving anybody any checks or money, but I can go further and explore this, just like my father's uncle, because he knew that he had a brother in Ravna. He knew that the brother had children. He knew that they were all killed in the war, and maybe this one nephew survived. And I knew that my uncle was married and had a son. Every time I'd go to Poland, and I've been to Poland quite a bit, I was always looking. Maybe I'll bump into him. I still have one cousin that I don't know is somewhere, but it's a girl, and I don't know her last name, if she's married. So I can't look for her that easily.
So you have all these connections, you're recreating your family. How did you tell your children about your experience?
Well, okay. So in bits and pieces, you know, my parents would talk about, they had accents. My mother would sometimes, you know, talk about the hiding, but I never sat them down and told them about it. They're still finding out things like you about, you know, my life. When we moved to Greensboro, my daughter that's here was going to middle school here. And she came home one day and she said, "Mom, you won't believe what they're teaching us about the Holocaust and the Second World War." Because my girls read about it and knew a lot about the Holocaust. And when we watched movies or something on TV, I try to sit with them and talk about it. So anyway, would you come to my school? She asked, Julie did. And would you talk to my class? So that's when I started talking. So I went to her school and I talked to her class, and then another teacher asked me, and another teacher asked me, and then I got involved with the Holocaust Council, and I met teachers and became good friends with them, and it kind of evolved.
And didn't you help establish the Holocaust Commission here in the Carolinas?
Yes, one of the first members of it, yes.
And why is that important for you to talk to students today?
Okay, well, I'm one of the last from my generation, and when I talk to students, it's not about my story. It's more about what they can do to make this a better world. That horrors happened in the past, and people survived them, and that you have to be strong in this world to survive and to have a good life. And I talk to them in a sense, they're the generation who are going to run this world. And they have a responsibility, and that is to speak up when bad things happen, and they don't have to save the world, but to speak to the people around them and their friends, and not to wait for someone else to speak up. Because the Holocaust happened because good people did not speak up. And to wait for somebody else, they may never speak up. And that's why I do it. Because I feel that if one student hears me and takes it to heart, then I've done my job. There aren't too many people who can speak about this. A lot of Holocaust survivors are dying. And in order for us to continue with kindness and goodness, we have to educate our younger generation.
It's beautiful. Thank you for doing that, by the way.
You're welcome.
So your family, that in Greensboro, you had your parents, both survivors, your cousin, and then eventually her mother came here. They're survivors. You're a survivor. 3 children. They kind of they have the family thing. What did you do with them to show them where you lived? Did you ever go back? to Rovna with your daughters or your family?
Meaning what?
I'm sorry, let me ask it this way. Tell me, did you ever go back to Rovna? How often, and did you take your children?
I did go back. I tried many, many times in the past, but things just happen. Like one time I had 13 tickets to go, and my mother was living with me, and she fell down the whole set of steps here. That trip was canceled. That's an example of the kind of things that happened. So in 2013, I was in touch. Okay, let me go back up. I was in touch with the farmer's grandson who knew our story. None of his cousins knew it because the farmer's daughter told him when he was young about us and our story. And so he knew about us. And the reason she told him is because he was intelligent, he had a degree in physics, he teacher, you know. So his wife got sick. She had cancer. And he wrote to us and asked us to send certain medicines. And we did. And we stayed in touch with him. So I got in touch with him, told him that we were coming and that we would, like him to take us to the farm and all.
And who's we at this time? You and?
Me and Raya and two of my daughters and another cousin from Israel that's on the other side of the family. And I know this man who lives in Vienna. His name is Ed Serrata. And Ed happened to have been in Greensboro. He runs an organization in Europe called Santropa, which brings teachers together for an academy, and he runs the academy once a year, and he does a lot of work with teachers. So Ed, I've known for many years. Ed came over here, and just because I was having a meeting here. And then one night I thought, gee, Ed lives in Vienna. He used to be a photographer. He used to be a journalist. I said, oh, let me ask him if he wants to come to Rovna and Myatin and take pictures and be part of our group. And I emailed Ed, and Ed said, I'll be on the train coming. So Ed joins us. And Ed and I had an idea. We wanted to put Holocaust education into the Ukrainian schools. And I've already forgotten your question.
So when did you go back and see the farm and everything?
So we went back in 2013, and the farmer's grandson and his son were very gracious. We went to the farm. You have some pictures of the older lady. That was his mother, and she was living. She was 93 years old. When we got there, Raya and I recognized it immediately, except we thought it was so small. We did not believe it, that we hid in this. We knew we did. I mean, we recognized the house, even the curtains and everything, and the barn and everything like that. So we went back there, and we spent some time in Rovna. We went to the memorial. I wanted to find some papers of our family. We don't have birth certificates, marriage certificates. So I went to the city hall. They weren't very nice to us, but I found my grandfather's tax records from 1923. So that was one time. And we went to the Board of Education, Ed and I, and we wanted to talk to them. Nothing. So 5 years later, I go back. This time I go back with all three of my daughters, my son-in-law, and we go back. The farm is really run down because the mother-in-law died. She was 93. But what happened in this 5 years, Ed got a group of Ukrainian teachers together, and we had a workshop. In the meantime, way back, a couple years back, Ed emails me and says, I want to make a video of your experience the first time you went back. I'm sorry.
Just cut. So you were telling us how you got started telling your story. What was it like when you started doing it?
Well, when I started doing the story in front of students, I never knew how they would accept it, what kind of questions they would ask, and how I would feel about it. But I found through these many, many years that the students really get engaged in the story. They really are very respectful. I think I maybe had one incident in all these years where a couple of students were acting up, and it wasn't their fault. I mean, there's sometimes large groups. And I felt I had to do it for the people who couldn't do it. For the people who were killed and for the people who cannot talk about it. And I could. And it takes a lot out of you when you talk about it, because it's not a pleasant part of your life. But to balance it, I've had a very lucky life. After all this happened, I feel that my life has been good, and I'm very fortunate. So if I can do it, I will.
What was can you remember any tough question that was asked of you or hard to answer?
Not really, no. I mean, the questions that were hard to me were, do you hate the Nazis? Do you blame them? Do you, would you change your religion? Why didn't you change your religion? Things like that. But no, I think I was able to answer all of them. Some of the hard questions nowadays are with immigrants, I think, immigrant children who want to know how I got through it. They want to know were you able to live through something like that and then have a normal life. And I think that's something that they're going through right now. Okay.
So you're involved, as you said, with the North Carolina Holocaust Commission. You speak. What else have you done in the area of remembrance?
In the area of Holocaust? Mm-hmm. Well, we recently worked on a project called Women of the Shoah. And it was a sculpture of 5 women that their photograph was taken by a Nazi photographer, and then they were murdered, like most, and thrown into a pit. And the artist was taken by it when she went to Auschwitz. She somehow thought that, there aren't too many monuments about Holocaust women. And so she just called me to her studio, and when she presented the project, I felt that this would be a perfect way to honor my aunt and my mother, because they were very strong women, and that it was a different way of teaching, that it had to be part of an educational program, that you could bring students there and teachers, and I mean, we're rich. We have the Civil Rights Museum, we have this, and we have a history museum. And it has turned out just like that. A curriculum was written for it. And the city, the mayor, and the park department could not have been more cooperative than they were. It was really very good. And I was involved in the sense of raising money for it and bringing people to the studio, the artist studio, and talking about my story.
It's a beautiful monument. You just talked about how your mother and aunt were remarkable women. Do you have any particular memory about your mother that you'd like to share?
There are so many. My mother, just if you met her, you'd know she was a strong woman. She just exuded that. She never stood, for any baloney with anybody. And she just lived her life that way. And I always think, how would I have kept a 4-year-old quiet and alive in that attic of the barn? What would I have done? How annoyed would I have gotten with her? When she was probably complaining all the time. And so I think that takes strength. I think that takes a lot of strength to save a life of a child.
So we'll talk a little bit about the world right now. So here you were growing up in the most anti-Semitic, murderous, horrific time of history, and rise in anti-Semitism today. What are your feelings?
First of all, I am totally can't believe that I've lived through all these and that it's coming around again. That anti-Semitism has risen to its point. I know that it's been around for centuries, but I never thought when I came to America that we would experience so much of it, that it was just hidden and it just came to the forefront. And not only that, but I love democracy. I love being in a country because I have experience. I know what it's like to be in another country and not be able to go from town to town, that you have the permission. And when I went to Soviet Union, somebody was watching me for 3 weeks. He was outside the window. He always wanted my passport. So living in this country, I really appreciate it. And I can't believe that it's getting to be more, right-wing, and these groups of, not that appreciate the strong man and the Nazis and that whole thing that is happening here. I just realize they don't have any idea what it's like in someplace else. And even the latest thing with the protesters against Israel, they have no history. They don't bring up that Hamas caused this whole thing. They just want Israel to have, peace. But how can you have peace when you don't have a partner?
So where were you when Israel became a nation?
I was in the DP camp in Germany, and I had a radio, and I heard all that excitement in Tel Aviv, and I heard Ben Gurion. And I love going, when I go to Israel, I love to go to Independence Hall and hear it again. It brings back such joy.
And what do you think about the state of Israel today and all its struggles?
Well, I think basically it's a good party. I don't care for the politics, you know.
Let's see.
I meant country, not
I
party.
understand.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think it's an amazing country
Right.
because the first time I went to Israel was in 1968, and there was a lot of optimism because of the '67 war. And then, you know, it became more westernized and more westernized as time went on. But the accomplishments that they have done, to me, are amazing. And I just don't understand why the Arab countries wouldn't want the same thing for their children. I always thought if we had peace, they could send their children to school. But hatred is a terrible thing, and I don't understand it. I don't.
So we're so honored you're giving your testimony today. You speak everywhere. Why are you doing this testimony for the Shoah Foundation?
Oh, well, I'm doing it hoping that my great-grandchildren might be interested in seeing it and hearing it. And also if scholars want to, you know, found any value to it. And I'm hoping that by giving the testimony, someone somewhere will learn something.
And is there anything else that you want to share or add on to your family members?
No, I think it's
or-
wonderful that this project was undertaken, not only because of the usefulness of the testimonies, but I think it was good for survivors to be able to share their stories. Because, you know, in the early 60s and 70s, nobody talked about the Holocaust. It was too close to the event. And I think it's good for people to talk about it.
Okay. Well, you have shared so much of your life and your history, and we really thank you for giving this interview
Well, thank
today.
you. And I'm very fortunate to be able to do it and to have had a wonderful life in this country.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, Shelley,
Yes.
and you are,
Her youngest daughter, Julie.
and can you spell your first and last name for us?
Julie, Julie, Weiner, Weiner.
Okay. And here we are today. We've just interviewed your mother. So just start off with this. Are you named after anybody in your family, any family member?
I am named in honor of my great-grandmother on my father's side. So
And what
she
was-
was still alive when I was born, so we named, I'm Julie and she was Julia.
Okay. And this was the grandmother of your favorite grandfather?
No, my father's side of the family, so nothing to do with the Holocaust story.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A
on your
different
father's
immigrant
side.
story, yes.
Okay, great. And so you're the youngest of 3 children. Tell us a little bit about how you learned as a child your mother's story and how it made you feel.
So I never had a moment that I remember learning of the story. It was always part of our family. It was never hidden from me, and I don't remember hearing it when I was 4 years old or 8 years old or 10 years old. It was just part of the fabric of our family. And it was when I got a little older, in the age where I was at Hebrew school and other Jewish children were around, that I thought, how come they have families and cousins and I don't? And so that's when it started really helping me realize that our family story is a lot different, and my upbringing was a lot different than the other children around me. But it's always just been part of who we are, and we've always been very proud of being a survivor family.
So, did your mother ever come and speak to your class?
Yes, so when I was in what was called junior high, middle school now, I was sort of excited because we were studying the World War II, and I'm like, great, I'm going to be able to tell my story, and we're going to learn about the Holocaust and the plight that happened. And when we got to that section in the textbook, the teacher had one paragraph she read, and after class I asked her, I'm like, aren't we going to talk any more about that? And basically she told me, well, the Holocaust, those are casualties, and every war has casualties. And that's when I realized that this was not right. And I asked my mom to come speak to the class so that we could all get a much better understanding of it.
So when she spoke to the class, was this the first time you really heard her tell her story as an audience member with your friends?
Yes, it was the very first time that I remember her sitting down and telling the story from start to finish almost. And of course, at that point, I heard lots of details I hadn't heard before. And I'm still 40 years, without telling you my age, 40 years later, I still, when Mom speaks, hear things I didn't hear before. So there's always more to hear and to learn from her.
So while we're talking about speaking, so Shelley, you said that you're not speaking as much in person by Zoom.
That's right.
So what role have you taken on then?
So I've taken on the second generation role of being the child of a survivor and being able to go out there and hopefully inspire and inform other young people of what the resilience was and what you need to do to make this world a better place.
So Shelley, how do you feel seeing your daughter take the gauntlet from you?
I'm very proud of her, very, very proud of her. It's not an easy thing to do for her. And I just never thought about it. I never thought that this would inspire her to go ahead and do it. And I just, think that she's doing a hard thing, but she's doing it well, and I'm proud.
Thank you.
Have you ever heard her give her
No,
talk?
no. But I know she would do a good job.
It's because when Mom is in the room, she's the star of the show. No one wants to hear from me.
No.
So let's talk about how it was for you. Shelley shared with us your mom about going back to Rovno. What was that like for you, seeing where your mother was all those years?
It really, I'm a very visual person, so it put it really in perspective, getting a feel, and that part of Ukraine hasn't changed that much. So I could really envision what it was like to be there and to live there. And there was such a pride of how far we've come, but also knowing that my relatives are there, the spirit. So just to be close to where my relatives were was something that you couldn't express until you were right there, and that closeness you felt to the country and the people.
So what was it like to see the barn and the bunker?
Of course we expected it, but it's probably, everybody says, oh my gosh, it's so small. It is so small. And the farmer's house was so small. And we all know that the story tells about being there, but when you see it, it just, the human spirit, that definitely got through it all.
And how many times did you go?
I went just once in 2015.
And did you go with your siblings, your sisters?
I went with my sisters, yes, and Mom. And the fun part of the trip is the Ukrainians themselves were so welcoming. And Mom was like a celebrity, and we were like her entourage. So there were news cameras and interviews and people driving us places. And so it was so heartwarming to see this many years later that the Ukrainians still embraced the story and embraced that we survived.
So your grandmother of blessed memory also, Shelley's mom, Eva, did you ever talk with her as well about her experience?
She was always a little bit sad about her experience and her family, and so I don't think I felt comfortable asking her many questions because you could always feel it, that sadness. She missed them every day, and she would tell us stories about the old country, but it was more of a generic. In the old country, we made these Veronicas, things like that. But she didn't tell me a lot of details about her life.
So, Shelley, your mom,
Yep.
you were the only child.
Right.
So there weren't a lot, and aunts and uncles, and many people were murdered. What was it like for you as your mom discovered all these relatives in London and in Israel? How did it make you feel?
Well, sort of like what I spoke about earlier, all the people around me had cousins. I never had cousins. And so I embrace everyone as my family. So I love that we have cousins. And I introduce them that way. My cousin Jacob in Jerusalem, or my cousin John in London. So I don't just call them by their name. They are definitely my cousin. And I love having as many family members as I can.
In terms of being the child of a survivor and the grandchild of a survivor, and also both your parents, right? In terms of that, how do you think it changed your view of Judaism, or how you want to, be part, your view of life in the world? Do you think it impacted you somehow?
I think it bigger than Judaism, it just made me realize that we are survivors and that you keep moving on and you can be resilient and get through even the worst and darkest moments of your life. There's light. So it's always been the force behind me moving forward and being motivated to continue. As far as Judaism, as we see now and we saw then, there's always going to be anti-Semitism. There's always going to be people who have their feelings about Jews, and so it's made me very proud about who I am, and I don't hide it. So I think it's made me more outspoken as a Jewish person, and it's also made me more outspoken for others that can't speak for themselves, as far as everyone having their equal rights and the right to live the life the way they want to live life.
So how do you feel about your mom doing this testimony today, which is gone through all the details of her life? How does that make you feel?
I think this is a great idea for the generations to come, for sure. Because she's been speaking about it for so long, I feel like everyone in our family has, and Mom said, we've all heard her story. We've all been part of it. We've all been to Yad Vashem together. So we've all experienced the family story. However, there are unborn babies and people that haven't met us yet. And I'm very proud that we've done this. It's very hard for Mom to do it. It's an exhausting toll that her strength doesn't let anyone see. So I'm proud that she's still doing this day in and day out, sharing her story, even though maybe she's tired of it and would like someone like me to share the story. I think it's great that it's out there in this program.
What Dave, start. So you were sharing that about how you became involved with the United States Holocaust Museum and you went to the opening?
Well, my husband and I and Julie went to the dedication of the Holocaust Museum, and it was a beautiful day, and we sat in the second row because we got there so early, and there were like 40,000 or maybe 10,000, I don't know, Holocaust survivors there that day. And so anyway, it was a meaningful experience. Well, it was right before Julie went to college, and we came home, and then she went off to college, and I was cleaning out her room, and in her typewriter there was a note, and it said basically, you know, she was very glad that she went to the museum and learned some stories from people, and she just wondered why she was there. And then she wrote, I was there because I'm going to be an eyewitness to this event.
Beautiful, very beautiful. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that day?
I remember the day and just being surrounded by all the people that had been through the Holocaust and survived, and how proud we were. And Mom said it was a beautiful day, which just made everything better about being there and being part of such a large crowd. And my parents were always very good about including me in life and not saying I was too young or didn't need to be somewhere. So just being part of it was a wonderful privilege.
So as you said, the fabric of your parents' story and grandparents has been part of your life forever, and now you have a family. How are you passing that down to the next generation?
So I have a stepson, became a mom when he was about 7, and it was just always, once again, told him about Grandma Shelley, and so he knew the story, and the video was out, so he was able to see that. And then when he went, Centrope, the Return to Rivna story, that is the animated story that tells that. And then when he was in school, they asked Mom to come speak. And so once again, it gave that pride, and he really, I think he understood sitting in an auditorium full of his peers and classmates, how important the story is and how unusual it is and how lucky he was to be part of it. So it's just been part of his fabric now too. He's a little more quiet about it, but he definitely knows where he comes from, and although he's a stepson, he totally feels that this is his family and this is what his family has been through.
Were there any moments where you felt either sad or guilty of all that your mother went through and that she had to do at such a young age?
Well, growing up as a kid, you're so self-centered, right? So I think there was no sadness at that moment. As I got older, it was more sadness for all the people we lost and the life that was lost. So where Grandma and Grandpa loved the old country and how they lived the life in Rivna, that was all lost. And so for me, it was almost a haunting of all the people that we could have loved and shared life with that we didn't have. And then as a young person, just not having cousins, not having family, I felt that difference and that loneliness because it wasn't our choice. This was something put upon us.
So did your grandmother, who was also a survivor, and your mother ever make any special dish and say, this is from the old country, and I used to make this over there? Is there anything in your house?
All the time. It's always from the old country, and there were all of her kreplach and her Varenicas and her balinces, and people were better in the old country, people were nicer in the old country, the weather was better. So we definitely had this view of this little, quaint village that was always happy and perfect. And so, like I said, when we went back to Ukraine and we saw the old country, we're like, yeah, that's exactly how we imagined it, this old-fashioned village.
Did you get bat mitzvahed?
I did, yes.
Did you do anything special related to any lost family members? Sometimes people do that. I'm trying to think. I think my bat mitzvah was probably in the 70s, and I don't think that was something we were doing back then. Mm-hmm. They're always in our heart, and I think especially when you were going through the Passover Seder and Grandpa was leading it, you could feel the people that weren't at the table. You definitely felt it then. Mm-hmm. What's important to you, being a child of survivor and grandparents, that you carry with you all the time?
I think the strength of our family, the strength to stand up for what you believe in, to not be silent if you see something that's not right, to speak up, do something. I also feel like doing a little thing is just as good as doing a big thing. So if you pick up a piece of trash or you help out somebody that needs help, that is great. If you want to do something big, that is great too. So I think that giving back and supporting people that aren't as fortunate as you has been just part of my lifestyle and my philosophy. And now just carrying the torch and telling the story so others can hear it and hopefully get inspired.
Have the two of you thought about doing a session together where you interviewed your mom or she tells her story? Have you thought about doing that?
Not
I don't know. We haven't gotten that
No,
far.
like I said, she is the star, and
I'm not a star.
But the teachers and the people that are wanting to hear the story, and the people in the audience, they want to hear from her. That's really, and that's important. They need to hear it from the person who lived through it. And then I think Mom and I both are independent, busy women, and to sit down and do an interview might not be anything that we're putting our energy in.
Right.
But we are available.
Right.
Any other special moments or thoughts you have about sharing about your mom and her history and how, as you said, you turn bad into good with all that you do?
There's one moment, a couple moments, but the day she came to school, I was so proud, and my classmates all heard the story, and now we're riding the bus home. I am, and from the back of the bus, I hear someone talking disparagingly about my mom and who she came to class, and using some words that I did not like, and it just really made it all come close to heart, because here I was so proud that we were able to tell my classmates about this story, and still, just a few hours later, they're not believing it and they're saying nasty things. So that just sort of urged me to keep going, and also know who your enemy is.
It's a beautiful story. Anything else either one of you want? Is there anything you want to say to your daughter as she carries on?
Well, I think I said it all in the beginning. I think that she's doing a fabulous job and taking the time and learning so much about it, how to present it, and it's kudos. I give her a lot of credit for doing what she's doing, because it's not easy. And, if she can engage these students, I think it's very important work.
And did you do any family research, and was that revealing of or enlightening of anything? Did you discover anything?
So I think, being the third girl, everyone in our family has their place. And my middle sister, Deborah, she's done all the research and she has all the charts. I don't do that. I just sort of go on the fly. I guess one other message I was thinking as you were talking about me sharing our family story is being the third girl. My sisters, went to college before me, they got married before me, they had children before me. And so there wasn't a lot I thought that I could do that was unique and independent of my sisters. So being able to be the one out of the three of us that is carrying this on is a very special honor for me, and I'm really glad I can do this part.
And what was the calling? What made you step up and do that? What made you say, this is my calling now?
I don't think it just has always been who I am. I've never been afraid to speak up. I'm a talker, and it just was something that I felt very comfortable sharing and felt that it was important. But I don't think I had that epiphany that said, oh my goodness, this is what I'm doing from here on in. It just came naturally, and it feels very natural. And it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything different than other people. I'm just sharing my story, and that's all I can do.
And is it rewarding?
It is. It's been wonderful to see the kids, and we've done some in person and some virtual, and just see their faces and their questions and their interest has been very rewarding.
I asked Shelley this, your mom, before. Has there ever been any particular question that moved you or was very or difficult to answer so far?
Not yet. I think the difference is I'm a step away from all this. I didn't live through it. So it's not going to hit me in my heart the same way. So they're really, all the questions have been thoughtful. I've made a career of working with children. So I'm used to kids, and I'm used to whatever they ask is fine as long as they're communicating.
Okay, great. So anything else you'd like to share? Any special memory or?
Not,
Look how cute we are. No.
no, I just think that we really, when Julie talked about my mom and how sad she was, she also had a very strong guilt complex because she survived and her family did not. And that was always part of her, because she was really a people person and loved parties and people and things. But this part of her life was just something she carried with her till the end, the guilt she felt.
Anything else you want to share?
I think I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. It's an
Well,
honor.
Our pleasure.
well, thank you for coming here, okay?
Thank you.